All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining us this evening. We are here for From Family to Fiction Unearthing Historical Narratives. We at the Princeton Public Library love programs for writers. We love programs about genealogy. And so we were very thrilled to have this program come up, which combines those two great loves here at the intersection of both of those topics. As I mentioned, the chat and Q&A are available to you. Please do feel free put your questions or thoughts in either of those forms as we go. And I am delighted to introduce our speaker today, who is author Lindsay Marie Morris. She is a Los Angeles-based novelist and journalist. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Communications from Marquette University. A former Shape magazine editor with a passion for storytelling, Lindsay continues to write for various publications, including Forks Over Knives, for which she is a frequent contributor. Her work spans multiple topics, with a particular focus on travel, small business, health, wellness, and plant-based lifestyle. She is the author of The Last Letter from Sicily and Beneath the Sicilian Stars, both published by Storm Publishing. You can find The Last Letter from Sicily on our physical shelves and both of those titles as ebooks on Hoopla. So we hope you'll check those out as well. Lindsay, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you, everybody who is out there. I am so delighted to be able to share this with you and invite you to utilize your libraries like the Princeton Public Library because they can be great resources for genealogical research. So we're going to get started. And we're going to dive right into the program From Family to Fiction. And we are going to unearth historical narratives and transform personal history into unforgettable fiction. Together, we'll explore how stories from our ancestors can inspire powerful, meaningful tales that connect the past with the present. Now let's get started. So, as Nora said, I am a journalist and novelist. I have my BA from Marquette University, where I studied journalism and majored in communications. I am a former Shape editor, and I have more recently been contributing to Forks Over Knives, among other national publications. And I'm a book coach as well as instructor. So let me tell you about my inspiration. You can see my first novel, The Last Letter from Sicily, on the right. Now, if you look at the bottom, you'll notice the tag inspired by a true story. Well, that story comes from my Sicilian grandparents who are pictured on the left. They were separated for 8 years, first by geography and then by World War II, after my great grandparents moved their family to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. There, my grandmother worked as a seamstress at the Junior House Garment Factory, when my grandfather stayed behind in Sicily and ended up serving with the Italian army in Cagliari, Sardinia. How they managed to keep that long distance relationship going, especially when the US and Italy were at war and communication was virtually impossible, had always fascinated me. In 2019, I started writing a short story in a creative writing class here in LA. And eventually that story grew and it became the novel that you see on the right. But that journey from uncovering my family history to crafting a novel taught me a lot about blending fact with fiction. Today, I'm going to share with you some of what I've learned about the research, the building of characters, and shaping stories, family stories, into compelling historical fiction. And here's an overview of what we'll cover. I've broken it into two essential buckets: finding your story and building fiction. Stories often begin right at home with family memories, old letters, photographs, even just a single detail that can spark your curiosity. By digging into your family's past through interviews and archives, you can uncover meaningful connections between personal experiences and larger historical events. From there, we'll shift gears and go into the craft of writing, how to develop characters, how to discover universal themes, those themes that give your story weight, and structure it with what I call the scaffolding method. This approach will help you balance historical accuracy with imaginative storytelling. You are bringing both the era and the emotional core of your narrative vividly to life. Finally, we're going to do a short writing exercise, and I'll answer your questions at the end. You can feel free to place those in the chat box, and we'll go over those. Now that we understand how important it is to start with your family's story, the first step is capturing those stories accurately. The stories we carry from our families may seem small, but they shape who we are, and sharing them honors our roots and keeps them alive for future generations. Let's explore some of the practical ways that you can record your family history through interviews, recordings, and other methods. You don't want those precious memories to get lost. Family interviews are a great way to preserve stories accurately. And to do so, you can use built-in apps right in your phone, like Voice Memo for iPhone or Smart Recorder on Android. Both of these are free and easy to use. I also recommend Rev Voice Recorder. It offers human and AI transcription services for a fee. So while the recording is free, getting the written transcriptions actually requires a subscription. I subscribe and find it really valuable for my journalism work as well as the interviews I've done for both of my novels. When you're interviewing, how you ask the questions really matters. Your goal is to dig deep and uncover rich, meaningful stories. You're inviting your interviewee to share their experience in their own words. Closed questions like, "Did you enjoy living through the war?" might get you a simple yes or no response. But open-ended questions like, "What memories do you have from those war years?" invite richer, more detailed stories. Your goal is to encourage your interviewee to share their experiences and feelings, not just the facts. So instead of asking, "Was your childhood happy?" try, "What was a typical day like for you as a child?" This can help you paint a fuller picture. Think about asking questions that explore the senses, emotions, routines, and personal reflections to really bring your story to life. Now, what if your family members have passed and you can't ask them these questions? This was my situation. And that's where genealogical research and records can come in handy. As comedian Jeremy Hardy said, family history is about the gap between what we think we know is real, and that gap often holds the richest stories. We're really lucky to live at a time when archives and records are just a few keystrokes away and accessible on the internet or at your public library. There are several reliable online resources for family history research. Most libraries have access to ancestry.com, as well as MyHeritage, which is not on this list. Ancestry will give you access to historical records, including census, military, and immigration records. You can even find yearbook photos, which can help illustrate the styles of the time. Ancestry also owns findagrave.com, which is on this list. And they offer cemetery records and photos of headstones. So you can get some personal context. You can look at the way that the stone is engraved. Sometimes people will have put cameos on the headstones. Family Search is another resource where you have access to global birth, marriage, and death records. And for those of us who had ancestors who arrived through Ellis Island, heritage.statueofliberty.org hosts passenger lists. Finally, newspapers.com features a vast archive of historical newspapers where you can find really valuable insights of the times that your ancestors lived in. For example, you'll find op-eds and editorials so you can really get a sense of public opinion at the time. But gathering those facts is really only part of the process. As writer Patrick Ryan points out, it is the characters, the people who live through these events and how they respond. That's what truly brings your story to life. Characters are the spark that transforms history into something personal and meaningful. When you're creating your characters, family history can give you a solid starting point. You've got the names, the dates, the important life events, but really, that's just the foundation. From there, you need to use your imagination to develop fully realized characters who grow and change from their journeys, blending fact with fiction in a way that feels authentic. Now that we've talked about how family details can provide the foundation for creating characters, I'm going to let you in on how I put this into practice. Here's a glimpse at my process. I put together character dossiers using compiled memories, interviews, and archival research. This helped me transform a real family member, my grandmother, Concetta Marino, into a fully realized protagonist, Concetta Balistreri. After gathering the basic facts, I created this parallel vision of Concetta. She's based loosely on my grandmother, but I made this character younger. I adjusted her arrival date to 1939, and I added new challenges to make the story even more compelling. I used a similar approach with Gaetano's character. And I began with real details from my grandfather, Gaetano Agnello. And I used his actual birth year, his occupation, and the fact he had a long distance relationship. But then I created with those details Gaetano Aliotto. And his story was based on the challenges that he faced, which were slightly different from my grandfather's own. I crafted a protagonist who's rooted in reality but comes alive through fiction. Now that you've seen how family details can shape the characters, the next step is turning those facts into compelling story. We start with names, dates, documents, bits and pieces of real life. But how do we move from these raw details to a rich, engaging narrative? That's where imagination comes in. This is the moment where fact meets fiction and your story can truly take shape. By filling in these gaps with believable motivations and details accurate to the time period, you can create a narrative that feels both authentic and compelling. You're giving emotional context to bare facts, bringing history to life. You're imagining those missing moments, all those fears, desires, decisions, all those things that weren't recorded but deeply shape a person's experience. After connecting the dots between facts and emotions, the next step is turning that research into vivid scenes. For example, on the left, there's a real artifact or an image based on a real artifact. I had ordered a brochure from the Rex that I found online. I found it on eBay, and it was from the time period when my grandmother would have been coming over on that ship. Within its pages, I found marketing descriptions and photography, and I had a real clear sense of what it might have been like to be aboard that ship. I even could visualize it and craft scenes around it. So, in using that, I was able to create a moment, a fictional moment, where Conchetta aboard the Rex hears an accordionist playing. She follows the music to the ship's veranda and she realizes it's the same song that was being sung while she was out on her last night with Gaetano in Sicily. Here's another example of turning research into story. I found a real newspaper article on newspapers.com that highlighted how communication was restricted between the US and Italy during the war. Using that fact, I created a fictional scene where Gaetano is sitting with his friend Johnny in the mess hall at their base in Sardinia when Mussolini's voice suddenly booms over the radio, announcing that Italy has declared war. Gaetano is stunned, and as the radio shifts to opera music, Johnny quietly tells him, "No more letters to America." This moment shows how war severs his connection to Concetta, with music underscoring the deep sense of loss and adding emotional depth to the historical reality. Through family interviews, I learned that my grandmother's garment factory that I mentioned was actually converted to parachute production. And this was something that happened during World War II. I discovered why exactly on the US Department of Defense website. There was an article about something that's called the War Production Board. It was created in 1942 to shift civilian factories to wartime use. And that inspired a scene, and I'm going to read it now. The bus screeched to a halt, and Concetta carefully lowered herself onto the frozen sidewalk below. It was cold outside, too cold. She could see her breath and it hurt to breathe. She'd put on 3 layers of stockings this morning, and she still felt winter's chill deep into her bones. She was grateful for heating when she arrived at the factory, her shoes leaving wet footprints behind her as she shuffled to her station. Next to her sewing machine, there lay a bundle of white fabric. She ran her finger across it. It was silk and some of the finest she'd ever seen. Are we making bridal gowns today? She whispered across to Maria. Didn't you check your pattern? Maria whispered back, holding up a piece of paper. Concetta reached for her own. Canopy? She asked, wrinkling her nose. Hey, I just do what they tell me, Maria said with a laugh. Just then, Mr. Scalici entered, carrying a brown wooden box. Ladies, he shouted. Attention, ladies. Everyone stopped talking and turned toward Mr. Scalici. As you can see, we are making something different today. We received an order from the President's War Production Board to stop making dresses effective immediately. Instead, we are making parachutes. I have broken up production into 3 parts. The canopy. He reached into the box and pulled out what looked like a giant white silk jellyfish. And this thing, he tugged at a rectangular piece that drooped below the canopy. It's called the slider, and you have to push in a set of grommets like this. He pushed round metal pieces into punched holes in each corner of the rectangle. Then some of you will connect the sliders to the canopies. You should all be proud of yourselves, Mr. Scalici continued. Consider this your service in the war effort. Now let's get to it, shall we? Concetta reached into the bin and pulled out her first piece of billowing silk. She ran it through the machine to finish the edges. She held it up, admiring it in the light from the windows above, where snowflakes were gathering. By the time the lunch bells sounded, she had a whole pile of finished canopies to prove she was doing her part for the war effort. She grabbed her thermos and lunch pail and made her way to the break room. Maria was already seated and waiting for her. So, how is the world of canopies? She asked. It's almost like finishing a skirt, Concetta said, pulling out a mortadella sandwich. Except some guy's going to have to rely on that thing keeping him alive when he drops into enemy territory, like that Nazi pilot we saw in Mrs. Miniver. Concetta nodded as Maria continued to rehash the plot of the film. In the 3 hours that she'd been sewing, she'd not even considered where that enemy territory might be. And suddenly it occurred to her, it could very well be Italy one day. So remember when I asked you, well, when I shared with you the questions that are the good questions versus the poor questions? Well, asking the right question matters, and here are some prompts to help guide you to dig deeper into your own characters and scenes. Think about what brought them to this moment, what they're really feeling but not saying, the sacrifices they've made, or their fear, and how their world shapes the story. Also, consider who else might be influencing that scene. Like, who is that person whose shadow is across my grandfather in this photo? What's their story? Even if they're just in the background, that person's information and details about who they are can also add richness to the scene. These questions will help you create meaningful stories. Now, it's time to transition. How's that for a slide transition? We've looked at how historical fiction blends fact and imagination. how it centers human experiences and how it makes the past resonate with the present. This slide reminds us that our job as writers isn't just to recount events, it's to connect the emotional threads that bring those events to life. When we connect the dots between history and humanity, we uncover something deeper, emotional truth. So, with that in mind, let's take what we've learned and focus on how to write our own stories. Literary fiction uses the past as a setting, but centers on timeless characters and themes that resonate today. It helps us understand the differences and the similarities between then and now. Okay, so you've gathered your facts, your details, you've shaped your characters, and explored their motivations and emotional truths. Now, it's time to take those pieces and start building structure by implementing the 7 elements of fiction. As historical fiction writers, we also carry the added responsibility of bringing the past to life. And we need to do so in a way that feels authentic, as well as vivid and emotionally resonant. And you can do that with what I call the scaffolding method. So think about scaffolding that you might have seen on the street, supporting the building of a structure. Scaffolding is the framework that holds up your narrative structure as you build your story. It supports your hero's journey, adds a little tension, and ensures emotional beats land where they should. You're adding the emotional architecture, character arcs, dramatic tension that bring historical moments to life. For example, think back to that ship scene. The emotional architecture was the longing and fear. Character arc was leaving innocence behind. Dramatic tension. Will she ever see Gaetano again? The scaffolding approach can help you stay grounded in authentic history while constructing a compelling human narrative that resonates with readers. Layer by layer, scene by scene. One of the most effective tools for building that scaffolding is a timeline. I start one before I write my novels, and I do it in a way that charts key events, historical as well as fictional. I use Excel to list the dates in one column and a brief event description in the other. But you can do this with pen and paper, forming a grid if that works for you. Your goal is to blend historical milestones such as wars, presidencies, policy changes, and economic shifts with the fictional ones, like births, deaths, marriages, and breakups. This matters because historical fiction is grounded in real events that affected real people, some of whom or their descendants may read your work. So, as you weave your characters' lives into actual history, take care not to distort key dates beyond recognition. Instead, let your characters inhabit history's established framework. That's what scaffolding is really all about. You're creating something solid to support imagination within reality's parameters. Once you've built your structure using the scaffolding method, the next step is balancing fact and fiction. Writing historical fiction means walking a fine line between accuracy and imagination. On the one side, you have real events and cultural details. On the other, you have plot and emotional depth. Your story lives in the middle, grounded in truth, shaped by reality. Remember, the goal isn't to rewrite history, it's to reveal its emotional core. And as we'll see in the next few quotes, historical fiction thrives in the space between what happened and what might have happened. Most of us are familiar with George R. Martin, the author of A Game of Thrones. And he emphasizes that historical fiction isn't about retelling history exactly. It's about blending real events and figures with imagined characters and stories. A powerful novel like The Pull of the Stars will weave a personal story seamlessly into its broader historical setting, ensuring neither overshadows the other. Finally, we talked about the scaffolding method. This quote from Geraldine Brooks perfectly captures how using facts as framework can let imagination fill in the gaps to build a complete, compelling story. Now, I've shared a lot over the past 30 or so slides. Now it's your turn. Take a moment, think about your own family history. Pick an ancestor, someone whose story you want to tell. Then draft a brief outline. What would it take for you to build a scene for this ancestor? It can be based on an anecdote, a photograph, any detail from their life. Remember, it's not just about the facts. Try to imagine what they might have felt, their hopes or fears beneath the surface, and then include within that outline what facts and research you'll need in order to complete the story. I'll pause for about 5 minutes to give you some time to flesh that outline out. And afterward, I'll invite some of you to share what you've created. Yeah, Julie, let's hear from you.
Hi, you can hear me
Hi.
okay?
Yeah,
So this has really been truly, truly excellent
thank
program.
you. Thank you.
I did with your I've been doing a lot of research on my family history. My mother survived the Holocaust, but 99% of her family did not, and that's not much of an exaggeration. And just based on your prompt, what I was doing was, just imagining what deportation day was like for so many of the family that got lost in that lost their lives in the exact same day. And it was an excellent prompt, an excellent question, because I can't even imagine. I can't imagine getting your kids ready. I can't imagine getting your bag ready. I can't imagine knowing what you're packing or what you're thinking. So I just was going to thank you publicly for the prompt because what the heck could have been going through their minds? Because again, my poor great aunt got her kid, who the cousins were my mother's age, and she had to get these little kids ready to get them somewhere, and it just brought up a lot of questions for me, so I wanted to thank you.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, sometimes just like using that, like a question, like a general question can take you somewhere. So I'm glad that helped.
Very much so, thank you.
I also wanted to share that when I wrote the last letter from Sicily, it actually took me years to write because I really didn't know what I was doing and I didn't plot it. I was with that novel what you'd call a pantser, riding on the seat of my pants to finish the novel. And I finished it. It took me probably at least 3 years. But by the time I got around to my second novel, it took 6 months. So the difference was that I used all the strategies that I've laid out here. I actually sat down and, at the drawing table and put together a process because I knew I had to finish it. It also helped that I had a contract and had a deadline. And so I guess that's one of the reasons why I share this is because I want other people to see how they can do it in a way that is strategic, but also helps you maintain order, so that it doesn't take you years.
Looks like we do have a hand raised, so
Okay,
Christine, I'll
great.
get you on here.
Hi, Christine.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much. It's been very insightful. I, like you, share Italian heritage, and many in New Jersey do. Um, I have a wealth of uh, genealogical information that I've been going through for myself and my husband, but some of it, interestingly, on my father's side is Norwegian, and it goes back to tales, ancient tales of Norse sagas, even where it's more deciphering facts from fiction. But what I dwelled on, based on your prompt, was more recent. My grandparents, who were born in Calabria and lived in
Mm.
Calabria and married there, but many Italians immigrated in the early part of this century, not one time, but many times into the US. I won't
Mhm.
say immigrated, they came many times. Often young men coming, having to make their way, and then they went back to Italy. In the case of my ancestors, my grandfather went back and married my grandmother. He was 24, she was 17. And they had a child there. He came back to the US. And then it wasn't for a few years before he had enough money to send for her again. So I focused on for the short exercise, on the time of his asking her to marry him, what I imagined, knowing that he couldn't stay there, that he wanted to make something better for his family, and go to the US and likely spend some years making his way before he could come back for them. And the leap of faith that that would be successful and that your family would be kind of hanging on the line waiting for that success, and all the uncertainty surrounding it. How do you express that in just a conversation, or a serious conversation, obviously, with your potential fiance? It's a very heavy, very difficult, I imagine, thing to ask of anyone, considering
Mhm.
the life ahead of them and the risks. So thanks very much for the prompts.
Yeah, yeah, no problem. Yeah, it sounds great. Yeah, I mean, so many people, like you said, had that experience of going back to the home country after things didn't work out when they first settled, and then they came again, or like they had sent somebody over. And so there are lots of these stories where they had this separation. And I think that that's kind of an intriguing angle for a lot of fiction as well, just that the distance between people physically and emotionally. Yeah. And if you have any other questions for me, or if you want to share anything, I have on my site, you can contact me. It's lindsaymariemorris.com. And I'm always happy to field questions. And if you are interested in me speaking with your organization or book club, I'm also available for those types of things. So,
There is another question in the chat. Someone
yeah,
wanted to go back when you were talking about sort of the scaffolding method,
yeah,
and then you also talked about, I think there were like those 7 components of fiction. If we could revisit that section of the presentation.
yeah. So, 7 elements of fiction. So that this is like the core structure of any fiction. You've got character, dialogue, setting, theme, plot, conflict, and world building. And this, like I said, you start with the details that shape your characters, and your character, in addition to those details, is shaped by, you get a sense of who they are based on their dialogue, and they are shaped by their setting, the themes, the universal themes that apply to their story, um, the plot, because you have to keep people engaged, and often that involves conflict. And then the world building is how you immerse the reader through all of these things. So then with historical fiction, the added challenge is bringing the past to life. And you can do that with all of these things. So the details of your character will be shaped by their time period, uh, how their worldview shapes who they are. Uh, if they are, for example, a 19th century woman, and who does not have as much agency as we do today, that would shape her character. Her dialogue would be shaped by the way that people spoke at that time. And you can discover this through fiction that was written during that time period, as well as reading newspapers, and seeing how people, turns of phrases and the dialogue when people are being interviewed in those articles. Um, and then the setting is really important because that is going to help with your world building. And the setting, you have to keep in mind that, for example, in my second novel, Beneath the Sicilian Stars, part of it is set in Palermo. Now, I've been to Palermo and multiple times, and have family there. But the Palermo that I know is not the same Palermo that existed before World War II, because that Palermo was bombed beyond recognition, and rebuilt. So, in order to write about that place, it didn't even matter that I'd been there. I had to go back and really research, pull out. For example, one of the resources that I did not include, is the Library of Congress. But your library would probably also have microfiche, microfilm, and archival materials. So you can find things like, for example, I was able to find in the Library of Congress photography that illustrated what Palermo Centrale, the train station, looked like, which is completely different than it looks today. And so I was able to describe scenes in that train station based on the number of photographs that I was able to look at. So that's just an example of how you're bringing the past to life through your setting. Your Also, your theme is going to be affected by the past. I mean, in the case of World War II, like we talked about, there were a lot of people who were separated by the war. And I mean, on both sides of my family, actually. My grandfather was a lieutenant colonel in the American Army, and he was deployed to Europe, and he was in Normandy and Battle of the Bulge. He was in Germany, and he his he left his wife behind, and she didn't know if she would ever see him again. So it's a similar theme where a lot of people were separated by that war. Same with World War One. So I mean, you can think about how there are universal themes that you can apply that would be shaped by the history. And then the plot, think about what would be plausible given that time period. What would, obviously, people who are going to try to find one another, who are trying to maintain a long distance relationship, um, you know, the fact that communication had ceased between the warring nations created a whole plot thread for me. Just little things like that. And um, the uh, so conflict is something that is going to be part of that as well, that there will be something that happens that perhaps only could have happened during that time period. So all of these things together are going to shape your story. So I hope that answered your question. Anybody else?
I do see one more hand raised if you have
Okay.
another moment, Lindsay.
Yeah, of course.
Lois, we've got you there.
Yes, I'd like to ask if you could go forward to that slide where you were showing 4 different things, excuse me, that you can help people with. There was the scaffolding approach, the character dossiers, the research roadmap, and then there was one other.
Oh yeah, thread development. Remember I talked about finding the thread, and that is the thing that is going to tie it all together. It's going to um, help. You are going to use that to map out your engaging scenes because there is a thread that connects the dots and keeps everything flowing. And so let me go back to that particular slide about the thread because there we go. So it gives you emotional context to your historical facts, and it is where you see the gaps for what they are, and you're bridging those gaps. You're imagining. So imagination is your way to bridge those gaps. Because, I mean, for example, I'd always heard when I was a little girl about how my grandparents were separated during the war and that they would send love letters, and it sounded so wonderful. And I even saw some of the letters. What I didn't know was that for 5 of the 8 years that they were separated, there was no communication. And so I didn't know that until until 5 years ago. And it was too late for me to ask my grandparents what happened during that time period. So I had to fill in those gaps in my understanding. And in a way that really opened the door to helping me write historical fiction instead of trying to rehash all of the facts about my grandparents' experience.
All right, I think that's the end of our questions here. But as you mentioned, people can reach out to you through your website as well. This has been such a great program. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
I will send out to everyone who attended tonight, again, links to Lindsay's books if you'd like to check them out, as well as some information on library resources for both genealogy and writing to keep you informed. We are in the next month adding recording equipment to our Library of Things, specifically for things like oral histories and family history. So please keep an eye out for those. I'll send that information out as well to help you capture, again, these critical stories, all those little details that can really help flesh out your own stories. So thank you so much for everything you shared and for all of this information, and a wonderful evening. Thank you so much,
Thank
Lindsay.
you. Thank you all. Thank you so much for your time and for listening. And yeah, I mean, I can't wait to see what stories you all have to share. And you never know; those family anecdotes can turn into into somebody's favorite stories. So,
Exactly. All right, have a good night, all. Thank you so much.
good night.
Night.
Ciao.